Well, before I begin, I'm going to just offer you an introduction. Thank you for being here. I say that sometimes on stage nowadays. I'm touring the country. I'll be in Longford on Friday night as you're listening to this, tomorrow night. I say to the audience, it's lovely to be here. And then they smile at that. And then I say, it's great that you're here too. And they laugh at that because it's like saying, well, it'd be no good if I was here on my own. And the same goes for this podcast. It would be no good if I was just talking to myself. The pleasure I get out of this is that every so often I meet somebody, maybe in the airport in Donegal, or maybe on the street in Dublin, or maybe last week I met somebody after the show in Thurles and they'd say, oh, I listened to the podcast and I really enjoy it and thank you. And that just gives me such a lift because it validates the sense that when I'm here on my own in this room, I feel that you are present with me. I feel I'm present with you. And it's just such a good feeling. And it has no purpose. This podcast has no focus really, except that it's a journal of my most inner, most personal faith ideas. And faith is a funny thing because it comes and goes. It's like the tide. There's a high tide and you feel a great sense of faith in your heart, and the tide goes out and you feel empty. It's like an empty beach. And I'm exactly the same. And like, again, I'm just going to introduce a reading, but let me say a word about somebody like Meister Eckhart, that mystic in the Catholic tradition, Meister Eckhart. Amazing writer, and you'll get other books that synopsize his ideas, which are very helpful. But there's one kind of singular thing about him, and that is that he talks about God as a singularity and as unknowable. And it's the unknowable God that I find is the idea that keeps coming back to me my whole life. Because the unknowability of God is very close to what you get in people like Dawkins or other great writers about atheism, other great existential writers from Dostoevsky right up until, Samuel Beckett or Camus or whoever. It's a great sense of how we fill the space when we think there is nothing but emptiness. There is no God. So what do you do? How do you become human? And those are really lovely questions. But they're comforting sometimes to share them. Do you know what I mean? Like that's I think what I'm doing in the podcast. I'm kind of sharing the full tide when the days are good and my faith is very high and it feels like there is nothing but God. God's presence is everywhere in the universe. And I share that with you. And then there's the low tide where, my heart is like an empty beach. There's nothing in it. You become a completely different person from one day to the next in relation to faith. Faith fills you with a kind of sense of God's presence. Faith drains away from you, and you look at all the rational arguments and all the modernity that you live in, and you say, sure, faith is ridiculous. And you feel, alone and existentially naked, just, you've no protection. You'd often hear me talking about, faith in the mother of God, Mary. And I speak about her as like cosmically. I speak about, the whole cosmos is in the womb of Mary. And it's a very, very strong image and it works for me. But then there are days that it doesn't work for me. It seems like nonsense. And there is that in-between place, between one and the other, between belief and unbelief, is a real place. It's a real desert. That's actually the place that I'm trying to nurture, to name. So I'm never a person who actually affirms the presence of God with some sort of confidence linguistically that this is the truth. I know far too much about Meister Eckhart and all the other great mystics who all would, attest to the fact that you can't really name God, that God is always some sense of beyond and transcendent from even the way you name God. And it's balanced between my enthusiasm sometimes in faith, my sense of sharing with you the motherly presence of God and how it affects me, how I feel it in the landscape, how I feel it in other people. But also then the other extreme where you feel almost, the opposite, where you kind of, where the loss of God or where the hole inside you where God used to be becomes a terrible, terrible emptiness. And it seems to be the way we work in the West. We oscillate between one and the other. We're either one extreme or the other. And a lot of the ways that people argue and fight in politics is to do with that sort of discourse of proposing something with certainty and then somebody else comes along and refutes it. It seems to be a dialectic, a process that people use within history to evolve history. The cut and thrust of the debate is what's seen in the West as how things evolve and develop. So it's something that the tendency is to affirm the truth. This is the truth. You'll hear about, even at the moment in politics in Ireland or in Britain or in America, anywhere, there are subjects will come up and you'll see and hear people affirming the truth, like with great confidence, and then you'll hear another group coming up and completely negating it and saying, well, that's completely wrong. It happens globally, it happens in every democracy. In the local one that we're living in Ireland, you'll see it in the Dáil in Dublin. The Prime Minister or Taoiseach there, Leo, and he'll be saying his thing, and then Mary Lou from Sinn Féin will come in and just cut the socks from under him. And that's the way we tend to proceed in the West. There was a fella in Tibetan Buddhism. He wasn't in Tibetan Buddhism. He was in Indian Buddhism, but he's revered as the cornerstone of everything in Tibetan Buddhism by Tibetans. And his name was Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna wrote a book really, I think he wrote quite a lot of books, and I'm not a scholar on Nagarjuna, but I'm just sharing my rough sense of it, and that is that he talks about the middle way. And the middle way is between the extreme of something being true and on the other hand something being not true. And you'd wonder, wouldn't you? You'd think there can't be a place in between. You'd even hear your teacher as a child saying, well, is it true or is it not? It has to be one or the other. And you'd hear even people on radio and television as adults saying that when they'd be arguing with each other with politicians, they'd be asking the politician a question: is it true or is it not true? It has to be one or the other, minister. Nagarjuna had an ability to create a space and an insight that illustrated to people that there was a middle way where something is not totally the truth, in an absolute sense, but nor is it not true. And he did it in relation to all reality, all the entire cosmos, the entire sense of yourself, your own self, being in the world as a human being. And you affirm a narrative that says this is the truth about my life. You affirm a sense of faith, let's say, in the God that you believe in, whether it be Christian or Buddhist or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu. You say that's the truth, and you have a clenched fist kind of attitude. That is the truth. And somebody else doesn't believe it. This is not the truth. And what Nagarjuna kind of tends to say is that, well, it is and it isn't the truth. So if you take the table is a table, that's the truth. But there's no table that exists from its own side, in itself, sui generis as table. No such table. Depends how you look at it. It's a plank of wood on 4 other pillars or posts of wood. You don't necessarily think of it as a table. If it was upside down floating in the ocean and somebody was sitting on it, would it be a boat? Nothing is absolutely true. That was Nagarjuna's point. It's a very, very modern point as well, because it creates a space within the extreme of something being true and something being not true. Those 2 other words they use in Tibetan Buddhism about it, substantialism and nihilism. So that, the substantialists say the world is true as it is. It's fact. The trees are facts. They are trees. That's what they are. The table is a table. And we have to kind of define the world as real. And the nihilists would be people, if they were in Buddhist tradition, people who kind of have fallen into the idea that if all reality is a delusion or illusion, then it's not real. So there you have one crowd saying, this cosmos is real, this world is real, this politics is real, these arguments are real, it's all true and real, it's there. And you've other people in the corner saying, oh, it's all an illusion. There's no reality at all. And those latter, you call them nihilists, and the former you call them substantialists. And it's the middle way, somewhere in between those two. It was like the ability to treat all phenomena. There's a great poem, it's a prayer, I've used it, I've recited it on the podcast. It says to treat all phenomena as like illusions, as like illusions. It's a really interesting thing sometimes. Wherever you're sitting at this moment, wherever you're walking, become aware of everything around you, whether it's in a room or in an open space, and try and treat it as if it was a dream. Imagine this was a dream. And there's the trick. You're in the middle space. You're not saying you're in a dream. You're not saying this is a dream. But you're actually saying, I can experience it as like a dream. It has a dream quality to it. But it's not a dream. And on the other hand, reality has a reality to it. But its reality is not absolute. There's a middle space. And it's the hardest, most difficult thing to talk about. Because to talk about it, you're constantly trying to use language with the presumption that words mean something. So it's almost like God itself. It's almost like in that middle space where you say to yourself that the world is illusion. It's like illusion. It's like an illusion. It's like a dream. I'm moving through the world like I'm in a dream, even though I'm not in a dream. And I'm also moving through the world as if it's real. It is, but it's not. Nothing that you experience is real from its own side, in itself. The cosmos is not made up of absolute realities like this is the table and this is the dog and this is the day of the week. This is the box of books. It's not real like that. It certainly is real, but contingently. And the contingence is that it depends on something else to be what it is. Everything arises from consequences. And nothing is permanent and everything changes. So that the table was once a tree. The table was once just planks of wood. And the very moment that we say it's a table, it may be deteriorating and decaying, and someday will be something different. There's nothing permanent. And everything is caused by something else. Everything is the result of something. So that in this moment where we say, that's the table, that's the box of books, there's my computer, this is me doing a podcast, this is real, this is totally real. No, it's not. No, it's not. This is a moment in the river, a moment in the flow of time, where these things appear to me to have an absolute solidity to them, but which don't. They have enough reality about them for me to touch them, embrace them, and experience them as real things. But if I can see that they're not absolutely real, not permanent, not existing in themselves as absolute things, it will help me not to grasp them. It allows me to be more detached. It allows me to pull back and realize that everything is passing. And you can see where that's going. I mean, my own self, that I think when I look in the mirror is real, when I wake in the night is real, when I'm sick and I'm worried about myself and having a big fuss about my health, I feel, well, I'm real. I am the absolute most important reality in the cosmos. That's the way we feel about ourself. Until we begin to see that things are impermanent and that nothing has full absolute reality to it, that it is transient. I mean, yourself, look, is it in your arm? Do you find yourself in your arm? Do you find it in your leg? Do you find it in your ideas? You're changing from day to day. You're loving somebody today that you didn't love yesterday, and you're becoming negative about somebody today that you loved yesterday. And what it is that we are, we don't know. We have a mindfulness, we have a consciousness. But it's like just a light in a very fluid river where everything is changing and passing and impermanent. And there you can see the whole need to be rooted in your mindfulness, rooted in your consciousness, rooted in the still center, not of the things around you, but of the awareness of things around you. And to develop a rapport with the things around you, whether it be your house or your health or yourself or your leg or your arm, or whether it be the ones you love or whether it be the the flowers in the garden, the daffodils, whatever it is that the world around you, you develop a rapport with it and an equanimity with it that's based on a kind of a knowing that this is not permanent. And it creates, I think, a kind of a middle space. A middle space between the thing you affirm as true and, on the other hand, the awful sense of nihilism that can creep into you. It can creep in like that nothing matters. You know, that your life is useless, that people don't love you, that nobody cares for you, that the flowers are just weeds, that it's all just awful, existentially painful to be here. It's a profound kind of nihilism. And we slip into it. I talk about it like it's the low tide. The beach is empty, and it's a very painful place to be. It's the place where Jesus was, I think, when he says that line, Eloi lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Imagine that was written down by all the people recording him as his final words, penultimate words. My God, why have you forsaken me? That sense of abandonment, that sense of loss. In his faith was so beautiful. Jesus had so many stories and so many parables and so many moments of encounter with other people which were recorded and which have lasted 2,000 years as magnificent archetypal stories and insights into human nature. So he was just an extraordinary person. And he affirmed a sense of faith in God. And imagine there at the end, he's abandoned. He's crying out, God, you have forsaken me. I'm lost. And he's lost in a kind of nihilism. He's gone from one extreme of affirming the Father, the Godhead within him, within his heart, assured everybody else, this is the way to heaven. Just open the door in your heart and go in there and you'll be at peace. And he's saying all this to them, and then he ends up like, why have you abandoned me? And that too is that he's moving from one full tide moment, one moment that Nagarjuna might call substantialism. And he's moving to the other extreme, the moment when the tide has gone out and he's empty of all hope. He's in despair. Make no doubt about it, there's no sugar-coating that psychological moment for Jesus. Crying out aloud so that people hear it, my God, you have forsaken me. He's moved to nihilism. He's moved from substantial to nihil. From God is there to God is not there. And in that sense, he's making the journey that is the fullness of humanity's experience of life, the fullness, the completeness. It's lovely to be high and up in the moon sometimes, in good form. As a travelling woman said to me one time, she was talking about, young people having parties. And she was saying that they've birthday parties now, and her daughter had a birthday party, and the following day they were going round, and they picked up, because they had it in a hotel, and the following morning they went around cleaning the room in the hotel, and she got about 10 big black plastic bags full of rubbish and out bits of food. And she said, like, all that waste for a birthday party. But she said, young people, they need to be up on the moon all the time, Michael, she said. But you know, Michael, you can't be up on the moon all the time. And she'd lived a tough life as a travelling woman. She knew what she was talking about. You can't be up on the moon all the time. As the song says, Paul Robeson, sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yeah, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost through the ground. Oh, yeah, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. A sense of agony and pain and suffering and woundedness that we go through leaves us at empty tide, leaves us at low tide. And all the things that we said and we liked to say about God and joy and love and the Mother Mary and lighting the candle, it's all beautiful. And then it goes. It just goes. It just drains out like water going away. And you're left empty. And the danger, as I say, in Nagarjuna's terms, is that you hold on to one extreme or the other, that you hold on to the empty, the low tide, empty beach experience and say, that's it. This is who I am. I have no hope. Or alternatively, you hold on to the full tide and you kind of grip it like you say, this is the truth. Everything is good and this is the truth and don't contradict me. Nagarjuna says there's a middle way. There's a way whereby you can experience things to be true, but not absolutely true. And that also you can experience things to be as like illusions, but not really illusions. So our sense of being present in the world is a floating experience. It's floating between two extremes. It was very eloquently put by, I think it was St. Augustine, who said, do not hope because one thief was lost. Do not despair because one thief was saved. And there's Christ balanced between the two possibilities. The one who is saved or the one who is lost. And Samuel Beckett, he kind of was really interested in that idea, that balance, that almost kind of asphyxiation between the two. And if you read a lot of Samuel Beckett's prose or see his plays, you get a real sense of the characters being balanced between despair and hope. Their paralysis is all about being torn between hope and despair. And what Beckett does is he finds comedy in that misery. There's a comic gloss or resonance in his characters, even though they suffer terribly. I always find Beckett is close to both Buddhist wisdom and Christian wisdom. And for me, I suppose, first of all, I think it's hugely important to name this experience. So to name the fact when you are high and in good form and you are kind of in love with everybody and you're optimistic about the world and you see God's presence in every snowflake that falls, is one experience. And to name it as that, like your heart is at full tide. And then also to name when you're at low tide and to be able to share that, to share it with you in a podcast, as I'm doing now. I'm at low tide today. that sense of emptiness, and to be able to share when you're feeling despair, when you're feeling like the snowflake just doesn't like you. Not only is there no God in the wind and in the breeze, but it just doesn't like you either. And everything you do is wrong. That awful sense of despair and negativity about yourself, struggling in the world where things are going against you, and leaves you at a low tide, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. You just feel so low. And I think naming it the same way as you name the high, those are first two steps, and then the final step. When you reflect on it, you see, oh look, today I'm low, but yesterday I was high, and tomorrow I will be joyful again, because the tide will come back. It will come back. I mean, they used to say to me when I was depressed, 2011, 2012, and the worst thing about suffering depression and being locked in a room on your own, the worst thing about it was you felt it'll go on forever. And the most consoling thing that anybody ever said to me was when people said, it will pass, this depression will pass, you will come out of it. The tide will come back in. So to know that you can name being low, you can name being high, but that you also can open a space that's between the two, you're able to finally realize that you can endure both the high points of faith, the high points of exuberance, when you're just so joyful you want to clench your fist and tell everybody that Jesus is Lord, or, you know, I'm a Buddhist and this is all true and wonderful, and, you know, my meditation sessions or my love and my prayers, it's all working well. And then the other times, nothing's working well. You go from one extreme to the other, but you begin to learn that equanimity exists between the two, because neither of the two are absolutely true. This will pass. This suffering will pass. Don't be attached to it. Don't let it possess you. This is a transient moment that you are consciously aware of and enduring with a sense of detachment. And when you are full of joy, don't grip that either. Don't hold on to joy as if you had found the truth. Remain detached, because the joy too will pass. When you push back from both extremes, you begin to find what life is like between low tide and high tide. And that, I think, is a place of peace. That's a place of serenity. That's a place of serenity that almost, to me, I sense it as like the most transcendent space you can be in. It's the moment when God really begins to become present. After Jesus said, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He spoke again and he said, "It's finished. It's consummated. It's completed." In the journey to being fully human, in the journey from going from the most high extreme affirmation of identity to a sense that he had been abandoned completely by the Father within him. Once he had made that full journey, once he knew the full musical score of that wide orchestrated symphony, that we call being human. He knew he had completed his life. I suppose I would say he knew he was awakening in the Buddha sense in that moment. It is finished. It is completed. And in that moment, what's completed is the sense of just transcendence is coming through. It's like the light is just coming through the cracks in the universe. And the light is cosmic. Okay. What do you think of that? That's me on a winter's day, March, 3 years ago since the COVID emergency happened in 2020. That's me sitting by the stove with a few bits of logs in it. That's me sitting looking out the window at the rain that's turning to snow, snow turning to rain. It doesn't know what to do. That's me and you being present to each other with high tides and low tides, and hoping that somewhere in between all of us find a kind of equanimity that is detached from the most joyful thing in our life and detached from the most appalling thing in our life, and can find in that middle space being here, and being itself as a ground of being, in its singularity, in its oneness. This is the being that is yours, is mine. So thank you for being here. Bye-bye. safe enough to tell stories like that now because time has passed. Many of the participants are dead and gone, and the politics has changed, and stories don't cost lives the way they once did. And I have thrived on gossip. I have made an art of rediscovering small stories, finding in the meaningless meanderings of strangers and other ordinary people a kind of heroic failure or faith in what is impossible. And that is the end of my little reading from the book, What is Beautiful in the Sky, which I read because I thought, well, it is just 3 years this week that the whole problem with COVID began. And here we are, and it's like, oh, there's so much to say about it, but that's as good as I can do for today.